Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. I'm Vanshika Saraf, a research analyst with the Indo-Pacific Studies program. In today's episode, we'll explore how the economic and technological cooperation between Japan and India is being reshaped by deeper structural changes in the global economy. We're seeing an increasing fragmentation in the trading order. We're seeing economic security concerns with regards to shifting supply chains, innovation ecosystems. So in this backdrop, we'll focus on the recent developments between India and Japan in terms of manufacturing, infrastructure, and technology governance. To discuss this and more, I have with me Professor Eri Ikeda. Professor Ikeda, welcome to this episode.
Thank you.
Professor Ikeda teaches at the Department of Management Studies at the Indian Institute of Technology, New Delhi. She teaches macro and microeconomics to MBA students, and her current area of research focuses on economic security, the global economic system, and industrial development. She was a 2023 Japan Foundation Fellow and currently a visiting research fellow at the Research Center for Advanced Science and Technology at the University of Tokyo. Thank you so much for being here today, Professor Ikeda. So we'll start by probably a brief overview of how the current partnership between India and Japan looks like, especially since the signing of the Semiconductor Memorandum of Cooperation in 2023. What would you say are some of the key projects that stand out for you, and what is the progress that we've made over the recent years?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. And then thank you very much for this question. What I see is the flourishing relationship between Japan and India. Of course, there's been a lot of challenges, but at the same time, at the government level, this signing of the agreement one after the other, this will show the good relationship, also looking at the history of no conflict between the two countries and then sharing the values. So these are founded very good relationship. The next step is to way forward with the actual implementation at the corporate level. Now, when I see one of those initiatives that recently Japan and India are advancing is, of course, in the economic security domain, pretty much reflecting the current global environment of securing the critical goods like semiconductor, critical minerals, and all sorts of economic coercion to be protected from. So almost, this friendshoring that is also beyond Japan and India that are all talking the similar things to go against or to protect from the strength of China. But in a way that cooperation also becomes very difficult because many countries are also looking more inwardly to protect their national interest. So in that context, of course, the collaboration and the cooperation is one, but how to maintain the strategic autonomy. Now, when we talk of the strategic autonomy, we need to also build on the strategic indispensability. The Japan's technological strength remains there, but still a lot of loss in the past. So, and then India at the same time wanting to have much more technological advancement. So in that sense, I think the technological cooperations, which we will most likely address today, but will be very critical for both of the countries in the future.
Right. Thank you so much for setting that context. And, in a lot of your work, you've also referred to how India is obviously trying to leapfrog directly into, high-tech semiconductor manufacturing. But we've not really had that strong historical industrial base to support that. So there is this sort of, missing middle in India's supply chain. So why do you think, this transition is so difficult?
Yeah, so basically the missing middle phenomena is something that India lacks the medium-sized firms with 200 to 500 workers, while the majority of firms are the small size and with the less than 10 workers, or the large firms. Like Japan and India both have this MSMEs are very dominant to contribute to the economy. But this missing middle is, in the case of India, that the middle size medium-sized firms are largely missing. And then when I read, the chairman of Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister was also mentioning that the challenge for the small firms is largely to have the access to the capital, to the skilled talent, to technology and supply chain. Pretty much everything is the problem for them because of the sizes and all that. What I observe is that the history and then policy, these are really matters to have formed the current form. And then, of course, the current government has been trying to change the system to have much more manufacturing driven economy. But I think this long-term history has a bearing on the current system as it is. And in a way that India has been having, this history of this colonial history, the British colonial era destroyed India's industrial base. That was one of the top in the world. And then post-independence, India has focused a heavy industry to revive the economy. And then, the Bombay Plan and the Arabian policy, these policies were there. Then when I look at a bit of a later period, of course, liberalization and things are there, but India has kept this protectionist type of policies, and till 1997, for example, that the priority items were reserved for small-scale industry, and then laying off the workers below 100 were requiring government permission and all that. So the protection of the small industry were pretty much in place and all that. So the government policy is also more inclined to protect the small companies as well. So in a way that, the industry were formed and the current industrial forms are made through this past policy. And now, of course, when it comes to the size being very small and fragmented, and it's difficult to achieve the scale that is required to become profitable and then to maintain, this businesses itself. So it needs more consolidation. It's very obvious. Then even for the recent PLI, for example, that the production linked incentive, you need to achieve all these goals of sales and investment. These target needs to be met. Otherwise, you won't get the subsidies, no? So in that case, being selected is, of course, something that you have to try hard, but getting the guarantee to get reimbursed with the subsidy is also another matter. So you need to have already the stamina or capital to begin with, especially for the small farms to join in such a scheme. So I think a lot of risk still, is around this industrial policy being implemented. And then the startup is also something that very admiring trend for India. But again, the startup means it's starting with a small size and it's sold for the big farms. So in a way, you need more companies to really come in and then, to create the value chain or supply chain in the system. But this, I think the policy needs a bit more leverage to have more middle-sized industry to be able to survive for long term with a more profitable environment. So I think the challenges remain to be here.
Right, that's very interesting. And talking about this, something that I read, and maybe this number is incorrect, but that India has almost roughly 20% of the world's semiconductor design talent. But yet, recently we've seen with government initiatives that we're really, planning to pour billions into building, physical fabrication plants. So, from an economist's point of view, I get it, the wish to develop, fabrication plants, but is this also a misallocation of resources? Do you think we should have just doubled down on our strength of, fabless instead?
All right. So in this question, in the economic theory, particularly when I look at the trade policy, there's always a debate whether we should specialize in certain goods and services, and also allocation of resources, what to do. Then the mainstream economists typically promote the so-called comparative advantage that one country should focus on what it is really good at producing, and then based on the being endowed with. Then from this theory, actually, of course, India is not endowed with these engineers for the design. But given that the strength that India is having, India should focus on the design, not the fabrication. This is a logic that they are going to advance. So then fabrication is good done by Taiwan, South Korea, China, Japan. So, the theory is actually saying that you should, ask these countries to fabricate and India to focus on the design. But what we need to see is not actually what the theory tells, but what is going on and what is the national interest and the national and the economic security imperatives at this time that the government is having, reflecting the current global environment. And what I understand so far is that what India needs is the economic development driven by these manufacturing to be put in place, and then self-reliance, and also to maintain the strategic autonomy, as we see in the Russian oil purchase case also. And then when it comes to the semiconductor, India also recognized as one of the critical goods for the industrial development and also the security reasons, as we have seen since the COVID-19 crisis. So at this moment in time, India is attempting to leverage the needs of semiconductors for this manufacturing drive, and then generation of the job is also very important, and then securing the goods, and then reduce also the dependency from China, particularly because if my understanding is correct, still India depends on China and Hong Kong more than 50% of the IC chips import. So, and then of course, India started to embark on the self-reliance and make in India, and then started to make own chips. And then India, so in a way that all the more drives are very clear in terms of the fabrication as well. Then when it comes to the talent, I think India can build a strategic indispensability around this design talent. So strengthening more of the talent pool is of course very important because of the current move, the global move of the semiconductor. We need more engineers. So in a way, if India can leverage to have more engineers at the same time, then everybody will depend on India. So that creates the power in a way for India to hold more power to leverage this. So in a way, the implementation or the use of the economic statecraft becomes from the protective to more assertive in this case. But anyway, at the same time, India will not let go of the fabrication for the reasons that I've already mentioned. So I think India will go with the both, talent to be more in the design bits, and then, end to end sort of holistic production will also come in. And then OSAT is also very much flourishing in India. So I think entire ecosystem building is somewhat of India is looking at.
Right. Yeah, I think thanks for that optimism. And it's optimistic to hear that. So we cannot discuss technological collaboration between Japan and India without discussing the Quad. So the Quad semiconductors have been an important pillar of the partnership. We've seen the supply chain initiative. We've seen working groups on critical minerals, but politically, a Quad is not convening. We haven't had a summit as we were supposed to last year. Of course, that also has a lot to do with the United States. But, broadly, the Quad still exists. It's, from what I understand, and I think you would agree, it's in the interest of all the four countries, especially India and Japan, for cooperation under the Quad to continue. But given the current, status of the group, what do you think are the limitations? Where do we need to, maybe bring changes? And how do you think, India's sort of this focus on self-reliance? Do you think it's conflicting with, the Quad's agenda? Because Quad needs an export-oriented partner that's a lot more open, a lot more advanced. What are your views on the Quad?
So I think when we need to think about this topic, I think we need to look into the individual country level understanding and also the regional and the global level. And indeed, the dynamism of the Quad has been changing quite a bit. And after the leader, especially the US leader, has changed since. And then but then the original intention of the Quad was to involve India actually for the greater, the FOIP, free and the open the Pacific idea that Japan was also promoting. And then basically this was to counter the rise of China economically and then also from the security points. As we all know, India is the fourth largest economy in the world, and then geopolitically very important, also the location and then strategic position where, India shares the border with China and Pakistan and also to connect the East and the West. Now that, of course, with the Trump administration and then now, Japan, Australia, India is trying hard to make the US be involved and engaged. And of course, after the changes in the national security policy of the US, that will give more uncertainty. But at the same time, the Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State Rubio said that last December that U.S. is deeply committed to the Quad as well. So again, there's an uncertainty, but in a way that Quad has already been very loose sort of forum for four countries to discuss the public goods and then all sorts of agendas. So one way to look at it, in a way, not that this functioning trend is one, but it has been there and it will be there because of the importance of these four countries at the current security environment. Now, the individual country level, of course, the many countries, out of four, Japan, India, US, for example, are all into the semiconductor, for example. So, these actually are going to create the overcapacity issue, like a semiconductor is one, definitely, and more competition will be red. So the country like India that is trying to come is facing the more severe competition. In a way, it's very difficult to live separately. US is displaced, Japan is displaced. So in a way that the competition will become severe. But one thing everybody is saying that India is still the domestic economy driven, which is again also need to be debated whether the demand driven economy is going to sustain, which is I don't think that should be, and then more shifted to the export driven. But I think it's very important for India to anyway embark on the manufacturing drive and then to continue with the innovation and research and development. And then friendshoring is also in one place at this moment in time among these countries. And then of course, like Pax Silica was really upsetting India, that India was not invited for the supply chain initiative and all that because of Russia to the bilateral trade agreement negotiation and all that. But now India is also going back in. So in a way, I think things are moving everything at the same time to in one direction. So but then of course, US is also changing the policy towards China. So how it's going to turn out is how these two countries make a deal in a way. So, like Minister Jaishankar was saying that we should shift our strategy from the just in time to just in case. So that is something that we all are preparing to be self-sufficient, not self-sufficient, sorry, self-reliant. So in a way that I think, of course, it's challenging from the tradition. I mean, to have a growth from export-oriented driven policies. But to cater for the need is something that all the countries are looking, and then friendshoring. In terms of that, I guess Quad is very important also to secure certain strategic products. Of course, when the thing happens, we don't know whether these are going to function, but at least now it's still the mechanism is in place. That's how I see.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting. And also at the Quad level and also at the bilateral level, we need to, at least visualize that we need to shift just from, simply technology transfer to actual, co-innovation. So my question is, what does that shift actually look like? So a Japanese company, are they ready to co-develop IP with Indian firms, or is there still hesitation regarding intellectual property protection? Because I believe the rules are different, the regulations are different. Do you see any progress in this?
Yeah, I think you nailed a very important point. Of course, what India has been wanting is the technology transfer and then make sure that India gets the technology that has been, missing. And the question is whether Japan, US, or the other countries are going to do that for the benefit of the both countries and then for the regions and then all that. But I think the trend is now more and more the joint development, co-development. One way is that in a way India also become very strong in the global system, that no country can ignore India anymore. So of course, the market access and these practical reasons is one. But for future development and then even for the market access, you need some technology that is matching for the Indian environment, not to just transfer what is working in Japan to just to India. So in a way that the developing jointly is, again, like you mentioned, that the IP is very, very tricky aspect. And then, recently Japan enforced this, not recently, but Japan enforced this Economic Security Promotion Act. And then we also have this non-disclosures of patents. And, even the defense sector, we have this Japan-India also GSOMIA, for the military information agreement. And, and the security clearance is also coming as a part of this Economic Security Act for Japan. So in a way that, IP needs to be discussed. And then if we can put these system in place to actually functions, then certain sort of, how do you say, certainty or the guarantee would come for the private sector probably. But leakages of the information, through India to Russia, for example, these issues have been recognized by the Japanese counterpart. So I guess this is the area where the more policy, alignment and then the trust needs to be built. But I guess potential is quite huge in terms of the collaborations if we sort it out in these areas.
Right. And a very important part of any collaboration, of course, is talent. And when Modi met Ishiba in August last year, of course Ishiba is no longer the prime minister, but there was this sort of labor mobility partnership agreement that was talked about. And so at Takshashila, of course, we also question why India needs to sign these mobility partnerships with all countries. But keeping that aside, how critical is talent mobility to the future of tech cooperation? And given that Japan is also facing a demographic decline, is there a domestic debate on how talent policy has to be rethought? And does India fit into that conversation?
So from Japan's perspective, Japan really wants Indian talent. That is very clear. So like you mentioned that, the policy or the action that is trying to put is to achieve this goal of the human resource exchange and then cooperation. So two-way exchange of 500,000 personnel in 5 years and then 50,000 skilled personnel from India to Japan, not Japan to India.
Correct.
So the one thing Japan is facing, what I understood implicitly from these, is the kind of the how to handle the relationship with China. Now that I heard that, for example, University of Tokyo has like 30% of the students being Chinese, because we have a lot of, the exchange programs, and then also many Chinese students go in to the university with the regular, this exam and all that. Then in such an environment, I think Japan is facing security issues, especially when it's associated with the advanced technology research and development, considering all these leakages and things. So there's an intention that, Indian students will, somehow changes this dynamism, and then considering in India-China relationship as well. So, and then, Indian students are very good at the STEM domain, which, Japan needs these skills in a way. So these skilled people are very much wanted in Japan at this moment in time. But like I said, the Japan side still has a lot of hesitation to India. And then I think most important thing is to understand each other at the individual level. Of course, we have a lot of issues at the government and corporate level, but to understand each other, we need the human exchanges, or, even become friends to each other. So these are something that we need to facilitate, but somehow, I think Japan just want one way, should want both ways, but operationally it's very difficult to see the mutual side of it. So that's something that I think we will see, of course, with the changes of the, recent public opinions and things we need to take into consideration. But even any cooperation, including technology and all that, I think we will need to see much more two-way flows. That's what I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I agree with you on that. Since you mentioned China, this will be a perfect segue. So we've been hearing the China Plus One strategy, for the last decade now. But if we see one of the biggest benefiters of this have mostly been Southeast Asian nation more than India. So based on sort of your assessment, do you think India has absorbed any of the manufacturing flee from China, or do you see also most of it going to countries like Vietnam or Thailand? And if that is the case, what about Japanese investors? Is there something that's holding them back from going all in on India?
Mm. So when I see the trade figure itself from China to other countries, then the largest export of China is heading to ASEAN.
Right.
And then, when I look at that number, it's a bit old data, but first quarter of 2025 was 322.5 billion US dollar. Then India was merely the 65 billion US dollar.
Hmm.
So in a way, the goods and service to ASEAN is very much large.
Hmm.
And when it comes to, of course, the business collaborations or business, then this 2019 conflict had a bearing on this relationship, economic relationship between the two countries.
Hmm.
So in a way that you know relationship between the two countries have been difficult. So but then there was a leverage to say that, like you said, China plus one strategy to shift to India because of very much of the, how do you say, the labor cost is now increasing
Hmm.
massively for Vietnam and all that. But for the Japanese companies, if you look at it, they already have established very good supply chain in the Southeast Asia and the
Hmm.
ASEAN countries. And if a shift under such a current very uncertain environment to the other country is very much of the strategic decision and a very bold move in such a way. That's why we don't see much of the Japanese companies, for example, to have increased from 1,500 number of the companies. That is already plateaued for many years for the Japanese companies to come to India. But of course, at the same time, if you look at the Korean companies to the Western companies, then they are actually coming into India with more commitment. So in a way, the Japan might be behind in that race. But we see the case of Maruti Suzuki and Daikin. But we also had fairly the challenging history in terms of Hero Honda to Tata Docomo and then some pharma
Yeah.
companies. So these are actually, also the difficulties that we have seen in the history. And then, the risks for the high ease of doing business, challenges and, sudden changes in policy, training, culture, socio-culture system, customs are also very different. So more of the, economic benefit is one, but I think still, relationship with China remains to be there in a way that China plus one is not decouple fully from China, but to de-risk. So in a way, the balancing strategy. So when it comes to the Japanese investors, of course, I mean, Japan sees India as the country. I think there was a survey by JBIC on where's the next destination is. Of course, everybody said India is the next destination. So everybody is very positive and then wanting to come to India. But actual implementation is very difficult. And but then when you look at the financial sector, for example, there are many sort of investment from the Japanese banking companies to the Indian buying a lot of equities for the investment banking to the commercial banking, non-banking. So certain sectors are seeing thanks to these FDI deregulations also. So not all in, especially manufacturing is somewhat difficult in a way of the ecosystem that we have discussed. But these finance and others are really coming in, also real estate. So slowly, I think we see the changes, but a lot of policy, how those needs to be sort of discussed and then improved for having a better environment for the companies to be easily to really invest in India.
Right. Talking about a better environment, if you could change one specific industrial policy in India to help the Japan India partnership, what would it be? It can be anything. It can be a positive change, it can be a negative change, like you want to remove PLI or you want to continue with it. Do you think any one change which would help the partnership further?
Yeah, that's actually a very difficult question. One. One thing I was thinking is the access to the finance.
Hmm.
In a way, I would suggest to make make available for the long term cheap finance by bringing the development banking system in India and shifting from the subsidy based policy. It could be the joint effort. So the both countries can contribute equally, to have certain shares or joint systems, or each country can have its own such banks and then contribute to the same project, but it needs to be committed for 20 years or 25 years with a low interest rates, which really facilitate the cooperation and the collaborations. Because when we talk of the access to the finance, Japan used to be having this great development banking system to have come to now, but it's all gone. And India also deregulated and then liberalized for the banking system. And then talking of all the MSMEs now with having more than 90% of the total, GDP and things. And then the companies, then, the interest rates now Japan has been negative even for many years, but now it's 0.75. And then, India also have the very high interest rate because of the high inflation and the very short term opportunity. And of course, the global commodity price is rising and the cost element is there, the exchange rate depreciating. So, it's very difficult for the individual farms to actually compete and collaborate. So I think these mechanisms somehow to bring in to facilitate these. Of course, there's a mechanism these days also to have funded for individual company in the one country to go abroad and things. But I think it needs to be scaled up and more systematic. If there's any common, grant for all the common targets to achieve jointly for certain sectors, that's probably something that I can think of now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm glad I asked you that question because that's a very interesting suggestion about, creating developmental banks with, sort of a long-term view of 20 to 30 years. Because, as you correctly pointed out, every initiative, every agreement, it all comes down to the financial backing, right? And this is something that I've always thought limits the Quad, which is Quad can come up with the most ambitious acronyms and nice initiatives and all of that, but if the four countries do not have a concrete fund to sort of back that, there's really no point of doing all of that. So I'm glad that this is a suggestion, and hopefully this access to finance does not become a barrier for future cooperation, because ultimately all collaboration will depend on this. And as you mentioned, interest rates, there's a increasing volatility in the markets today. We're seeing a very high bond yield in Japan, so the entire macroeconomic stability of the country is also sort of come into question now. So there are a lot of factors to consider apart from obviously tech. And I think another point that I liked was, how we need to focus on collaboration between SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, between Japan and India. So yes, I think we're ending that on an insightful note. Thank you so much, Professor Ikeda, for joining me today and helping us through this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation. Thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.